So there's an article today. The headline is Daycare Center Tells Parents to Provide Helmets for the Kids. Quote, it is advisable for toddlers to wear a helmet while in the playground because they can easily trip and fall. And
I saw that too.
You saw that too. So that's a good kind of stepping off point for this tentative review of the coddling of the American mind. This is Benjamin Boyce and my guest, Poe the Person. We're going to review this book. Well, we're going to ramble about it. So what did you think about the book then?
I thought it was good, although perhaps too long. There was a lot in there that perhaps wasn't necessarily needed or particularly interesting. There's a lot about parenting, and after reading The Blank Slate, I've been slightly dubious about claims that parenting has a large effect on children's lives. I mean, obviously, extreme parenting can have a big effect, but I've been of the belief for a while now that if you can bring up your kids however you want, and they'll basically end up the same way anyway, more or less.
That might be true, but a culture can pay attention or give stock to certain sorts of behaviors more than others. And what we see in culture, I went through my footage files over the last year of collecting just what I call mediocrity with a megaphone, which is just all these different campus protests. And over again, we see previous to Evergreen, but since Evergreen, just a bunch of campus protesters just flailing around and just going absolutely crazy and just acting like total idiots. And a lot of these people want to get into politics, right? But it seems like the culture itself is allowing for those behaviors. Now, whether or not the behaviors are more inclined in certain personalities or not, the other side of that is that a culture allows somebody to be a complete histrionic narcissist as long as they fit within a certain character group, identity group, or if they're championing certain causes.
Yeah, well, I think there's definitely some elements of it being now more tolerated, although it's hard to, it's kind of a chicken and egg situation where is this behavior more normal and that's why it's tolerated, or is it more tolerated because it's more normal? Yeah. And of course it's both, but it's interesting question, although I suppose talking about why it's happening could help us find solutions to how to stop it happening or how to deal with the fact that it's happening. I don't know if we'll ever be able to figure out what, exactly what started it, although we can come up with theories, obviously.
But we see, and I don't know, maybe it's not the pandemic that we suppose it is because of social media, because of the nature of the internet and the nature of what sorts of attention the internet kind of props up and pushes forward. And so, at least on Twitter and my Twitter feed, and I don't look at Facebook anymore after the 2016 American election, but I just saw this blossoming of tearing apart these not little topics, they could be really big topics, but there's this conglomeration of really big voices and really strange behavior around these topics, such that it excludes rational debate. So if we adulate emotional reasoning and emotionality itself as a valid form of public engagement, then what consequence does it have for the society at large to actually look at issues and actually change the issues?
Yeah, I don't know what the consequences of this will be. Although, of course, there are a few different ways that we could speculate it could go. I wanted to bring up the part in the book about the Red Guard that you mentioned in your recent interview with Kenny something. What was his name?
Kenny Xu.
Yeah, that was something that I read about in just in the Coddling of the American Mind that I'd never heard about previously. Although, of course, I'm aware of some of the features of the Cultural Revolution in China and that sort of thing. I hadn't specifically heard about the Red Guard. Do you want to give a summary? Or
The great Supreme Commander, Chairman Mao, issued a world-shaking call to us. You should pay attention to state affairs. and carry the great proletarian cultural revolution through to the end. With the Red Guards, revolutionary young people, as pathbreakers, the workers, peasants and soldiers are marching forward courageously. The red torrents of the great proletarian cultural revolution are sweeping the country and shaking the whole world. Chairman Mao says, Marxism consists of thousands of truths, but they all boil down to one phrase: it's right to rebel.
And what one Red Guard leader said pretty much sums it up. Chairman Mao has defined our future as an armed revolutionary youth organization. So if Chairman Mao is our Red Commander-in-Chief and we are his Red soldiers, who can stop us? First, we will make China red from inside out, and then we will help the working people of other countries make the world red, and then the whole universe. The most gruesome aspects of the campaign included numerous instances of torture, murder, and public humiliation. Many people who were targets of struggle could no longer bear the stress and committed suicide. So with the country in complete chaos by this time, Mao wanted to disperse the Red Guards across the country because he felt that, well, they served their purpose. The chaos has been created, and they did not want them to be able to band together and be able to stand up against them at a later date. So he dispersed them around the country to weaken them.
That was fresh in my mind when reviewing some of the footage from Evergreen and from Yale and other university protests. Just seeing how far the protesters went in sort of shaming and humiliating their professors, who are normally sort of the higher up in the power hierarchy than the students, or rightly or wrongly. Usually the professor is the one who's in charge, who is giving instruction to the students, or at least informing the students, leading the discussion. So it's kind of bizarre to see the students, even if they're not being violent, they're just being slightly aggressive. It's still odd to watch that. It's a bit of a bizarro. It's like a Twilight Zone almost. Like it doesn't seem that far away from this idea that the students could attack the professors, or that publicly shame them. Or, I mean, they're making demands, although the ultimatum that they're giving the professors is usually, we want you to lose your job, or we're gonna. The threat is we're gonna keep pestering you, or keep pestering your boss until we get what we want. There's no explicit threat of violence, but the fact that there's so many of them, and they are being quite aggressive, and they could attack the professors if they wanted to. And looking to the past of the Red Guard, it certainly is possible that it could happen. Perhaps if it was supported by the government in the way that it was in China.
The funny thing about protests that I've seen is that the protests themselves are very loud, very aggressive, and when you look at what sparked them, it all comes down to a very slight incident, like this very tiny slight or even impropriety. The case of DePauw in America last spring, somebody found the word "sand" N-word scrawled on the bottom of a toilet seat. So all you had to do was put the toilet seat down. So only guys would see that, right? Because a girl would be using, well, I don't know, maybe I'm gendering urination, but, and then all of a sudden the whole campus is overrun with protests, and the students are marching around, meet our demands, we're not safe, meet our demands, we're not safe. Lukyanov and Haidt, they get into this, I think they call it catastrophizing.
Yeah, catastrophizing. Like a catastrophe.
But it just seems like such a very inane way of getting what you want. It's like a 2-year-old, right? And then the interesting thing is that you will always see professors of these students defending them and being just as hyper dramatic as the students. So, which gives the lie to me that it's actually the professors that are teaching. The professors are culpable for the actions of the students, and the students they don't have anything to lose, so they just go forward with it.
Even the professors who are against the protesters, or rather who are not approving of the protests or how the protests are happening, people who are standing up to the protesters, they're still meeting the protesters as peers. They're acknowledging the validity of the protest in a way that seems somewhat bizarre just in itself. I'm not suggesting what else they could be doing, but like I said, the power roles just seem to be completely reversed in a way that it just seems wrong. And the professors who are supporting the protest are, of course, culpable, but also the professors who are against the protest seem to be at least somewhat enabling the protest to continue by engaging with it in a way that validates it, even if it's a disapproving way.
Are you talking about Christakis at Yale?
Yeah, that as well. Yeah.
So what we said, whether we intended it or not, and regardless of its content, hurt your feelings, and you would like me to apologize for hurting your feelings. Is that right?
It's content.
Yes, I still think that the phrase "hurt feelings."
Okay, tell me the phrase you want me to use. I'll use it.
I don't know. Was an expression of racism.
I won't agree the statement was racist.
We're telling you what it is, and you're saying it's not that.
No, hold on.
You can say hurt feelings, but I want you to recognize that it goes deeper than feelings. It is an affront to a group of people.
I recognize that.
Okay, great. So then that's what I want you to say. If you understand it, then you can put it in your own words, and then
Okay, so you want me to say, I apologize that I hurt your feelings. I'm looking at her and I'm listening very carefully. And it goes deeper than that. I know it's deeper than that.
So then apologize!
I want to make sure.
I understand, what is this?
Can I say?
That whole debacle of the Halloween costumes email. It was an email about Halloween costumes sent by the wife of the person in the video. So he did not even send the email. He was just on the side of he'd taken the side of his wife, who sent this email saying that students should wear whatever costumes they want. But it was very nicely worded, considering that she was she was not in support of the idea of cultural appropriation being a danger to students on campus. She was still very polite about it, and he defended her and got into this argument with the protesters. And I'm sure everyone watching this has seen that video of that protest.
Well, we can splice it in, but why do you think that he was feeding into them? What was he doing, or what was his stance?
Well, something my husband says a lot, although I don't know if it's a quote from somewhere, but it always says, if you're arguing, you're losing, which is, I don't really believe that. But in this case, that's kind of the quote that came to mind. The fact that he was engaging them at all, engaging with their ideas, engaging with the idea that his wife's email somehow harmed them, or you can put your little bell there, or it was causing them pain or putting them in danger. To engage with that idea and to debate that on this, well, it wasn't a real platform, it was just on the campus or some kind of yard. And to even entertain that idea was to give it too much credit, I think.
Really, but how do we invalidate something if we don't posit it as valid? Or
I don't know. Like I said,
is there something?
I don't really have a solution.
Is there something within the way that the protesters at Yale and at Evergreen had already internalized by way of their ideology or by way of the framework of how they engage with ideas that already states that they're right no matter what, that there's no way that they could possibly be wrong, and any engagement with them can only result in complete capitulation of the other party.
Yeah.
So, which is tremendously like a bad faith form of engagement.
Yeah, I think it's pretty obvious in that conversation, the one I'm talking about. They want to get an apology out of him, but not just an apology. They want him to acknowledge every single thing that they are asserting. They're not giving him room to disagree with them even one iota. That it's all or nothing. There's no space for disagreement on this issue, and it's like you said, it's not a good faith discussion. And to engage with it all, I think, was perhaps a mistake. But he didn't get into those terms, of course. But that perhaps if he'd known before engaging them that was going to be the grounds of their of the debate. That was going to be their demands. That he completely agreed with them. Perhaps he would have realized sooner that it was pointless, and he should have just gone to his class, because he kept saying how he was late for for one of his classes, and
but
probably
so it's one thing for Christakis and Weinstein to say, you know what, this is not worth me dealing with, and they walk away. And then it's another thing for the administration to do that, and that's what the administration does. They end up pushing out the problem professor, or the professor around which the problem ends up circulating. They don't actually deal with the problem itself. They ameliorate the students, they give them, concessions, and then they dismiss or they pressure out the professor. So the institution, the buck should stop with the institution if it doesn't stop with the professor, but the buck has to stop somewhere. And if it doesn't, if the professor caves, which in Christakis and Weinstein's case they didn't, the institution caves, but the internet will not cave, right? The society at large doesn't cave, and this is the problem that Evergreen is still facing, where they cannot, even though they preach about they're going to teach you about cultural competency, they are completely incompetent with dealing with the way that the outside world, the world outside of their very small bubble, disagrees with the way that they behaved and disagrees with the way that the students behave, and they chalk it all up to hate speech, and they chalk it all up to extremism. And then what do? So at some point the argument has to happen, right? And the protesters can't keep running away from that.
But there seems to be a huge disconnect between the universities and the outside world, which I think is either a symptom or a cause of all of this trouble, where the students are being protected from things within the university that they are definitely not going to be protected from in the outside world. It's sort of, the university is almost acting like an extension of the parents protecting the children. Well, I say children, but they're protecting these young adults from things that they will still have to face once they become full adults in the outside world.
No, I think the gambit is that they will not have to face that ever, because now, so the parents are giving the parental responsibility over to the school, and then the school gives the parental responsibility over to the corporation, and then the corporation gives the parental responsibility over to the government. So what's happening now is that the schools have already completely become overturned or overrun with this way of behaving. And we are seeing right now, over the course of the last few months, couple years or so, that large corporations are doing the same thing. And that's why it's so troubling that we have to pinpoint where it's coming from, but also see that it's taking root in successively larger and larger bubbles. So that once Google or YouTube or Facebook or whatever starts to say, well, we're gonna coddle our user base, then what does that mean? It's like, they don't ever have to deal with these unacceptable ideas.
Yeah, that is a worry, actually. I do suspect, maybe this is just me being too optimistic, but I think that the outside world and corporations, although some big corporations like Google and Facebook and these corporations that are in the public eye do have to toe the line to these unreasonable demands and this way of thinking. I still think that largely corporations will not be able to conform to the standard. There's just too many. There's too many people in the way, right? There's too many CEOs who just want to get stuff done. They, and in the competitive marketplace, the businesses that spend their time on diversity and inclusion seminars every 2 months, and who spend a lot of money on HR overheads and diversity inclusion managers, all these kinds of positions that have to be invented, and all this time is wasted. They're not going to be able to be competitive with other companies who are just there to hire the best person for the job, get the job done, and make a good product or service. In the competitive world of business, I think good ideas prosper much easily, ironically, than in the universities where good ideas are supposed to prosper. But there's just not as much there's not as much of a competitive element in the universities for there to be proper optimization, you could call it, of ideas.
Well, the thing is that the way that this, I'm tired of the phrase ideology, but let's just use that. The way that this ideology is inserting itself into businesses is through the HR department, which again has the lever of litigation behind it. Like we're gonna institute all these trainings so that we have plausible deniability if any sort of harassment or offense or even microaggression goes on. We can just automatically boot somebody, find somebody else. The job market can be at such a dire state that people need to conform to this ideology and just stop complaining and just bow to it rather than lose their job and lose their status. And furthermore, the corporations that are instituting this, it's almost like they're too big not to screw the pooch. Right. It's almost like they're so big right now that they have to toe this line, because now the social justice mob or whatever it is, the way that the ideology is implementing itself into the public sphere is that they dogpile onto brand names and they can force brands to go this way or that way. And because they're organized in such a way, they can scream and they can get away with this behavior. This behavior is completely acceptable. Samantha Bee just tweeted on Monday that all her writing crew are going to go out into the streets and scream to the sky about the Brett Kavanaugh situation, right? It's just...
Can you just tell me who Samantha Bee is?
I am Samantha Bee. You know, over the past few months, we've all discovered who's behind workplace harassment, and it's literally...
She used to be on The Daily Show, and now she has her own show called Full Frontal, and she's supposed to be funny. She's very difficult for me to watch, but...
Oh, yes, I actually know who you're talking about now.
What men literally cannot understand is this isn't about them. Whoa! This isn't about men. That is unbelievable.
Remember, you say she's supposed to be funny. I remember seeing one of her comedy specials talking about some thing that was popular on YouTube.
But that behavior, because it's infected certain key parts of our society, such as media, and then the really large companies, and then new media specifically, it can really astroturf, which goes to say it can really change the debate. It can really frame everything the way that it wants it to. And what's really disturbing is that what we have now, and I'm sorry to be so negative, but I want to ratchet up the stakes a bit. But what came out last week was that this silly little report that talked about the Alternative Influence Network, where it wrote about YouTubers, like this huge thriving mass of alt-right extremists, you know. And if you start watching
Jordan Peterson, next you're watching Dave Rubin, and then you're going over to Roaming Millennial, and then bam, you're into the Nazis.
Did you saw the PewDiePie bit? Did you? Sounds like
yeah. I was quoting him. They're targeting the free thinkers on these platforms. They're targeting people like you and me who just. I'm very optimistic too. It's like, well, it's really ridiculous. Why don't we just talk our way through it? But it's so ridiculous at this point that you can just make this claim that they're all alt-right and then shut them all down. And then you have a bunch of mainstream media outlets just saying, oh, look at how they're all connected. Look at how they're all connected. Don't look too hard, but look at how they're all connected. Yeah,
something that that I was able to formulate better in my mind after reading Coddling of the American Mind was the idea that it's all connected to safetyism, as they call it. The idea that if something can cause something that can cause something else that will cause you harm, then that first thing, thing A, is dangerous and it's harmful in itself. If it could cause something that could cause something else that could do you harm, then it must be safetyized. It must be made so that it can no longer harm you. You must be made safe from it.
Yeah. And where does that stop? My clever little retweet of the article that we opened up with was that high schools should start pouring bleach into teenagers' eyes so they don't get hurt by words on the internet.
That was one of the interesting, I can't remember if it was just an exact quote from the book, was that the idea that there's no danger in overprotection. It's taken as what's the expression? It's assumed that there is absolutely no risk in overprotecting. There's only danger that can come from the perceived risks, but it's not even acknowledged that there's this larger diffuse danger of overprotecting people from things and making them fragile rather than anti-fragile, which is an interesting concept that they introduced early on in the book from Nicholas Taleb's book Antifragile, which is the being opposite of fragile, meaning that when you encounter bad experiences as a person, you encounter ideas that are different from yours, you become stronger against those things. They no longer can hurt you the way that they did the first time you encountered them, which is only true of a certain number of dangers and not other things.
Yeah, and there are even dangers that begin extremely dangerous, and then you learn not to be fearful of them, and then you learn to master them, and then they become actual tools. Just like, for the stupidest example I can think of, a knife. We protect the child from the knife, and then we introduce certain circumstances in which the child can see how the knife is used and then use the knife, and then they can go out and carve up, either their enemy's face, or they can make a cute little panda bear for their girlfriend or boyfriend or whatever.
Yeah. One of the first times I heard about this sort of concept, although that was before I heard it was called anti-fragile, was I heard that I know you're not supposed to call them Inuit or Eskimo or those people who live in cold places in igloos. Apparently, they raise their children to handle very sharp knives. From as soon as they can hold a knife, the children are just they can play with them. Because mastery of the knife is important for their culture. They need to be able to skin the seals and the polar bears or whatever they do. That's probably very racist. I don't know. The idea is that the knife is so important that, it's very unlikely that the child is actually going to kill themselves with the knife by accident. They're just going to, hurt their fingers a little bit. Maybe they'll cut a finger off. That's probably the worst case scenario. But they're not actually going to die from cutting their hands with this sharp knife. What they're going to do is learn how to handle a very sharp knife, which is important for, it's an important part of their culture and their way of life.
By that logic, it seems to me that putting helmets and foam on everything is a way to actually, what you're doing is fostering incompetency. That's what you're ultimately doing.
Yeah.
You're robbing people of not just harm, but the ability to do things in the world, the ability to think through ideas. And stuff like that. There's the protest at Texas State University about a year ago, maybe a couple years ago. There was this article that was put out in the student newspaper for Texas State University, and the article was titled "Your DNA is an Abomination." And it was all about the white race. It was all about whiteness and how it needs to be eradicated. And that caused a big controversy, because it seemed a little racist. And,
a bit.
And the funny thing is that the defense of the guy is like, well, I wasn't talking about white people. I was talking about the idea of white, right? But why did you use DNA in your freaking headline then, dude? Like, it's nice that you carved this little back door. Anyways, the student president, he went on the news and said that this wasn't good. This is bad for public relations. This is bad for student relations. It's really divisive. And he called for the student newspaper to be defunded. Then the students went through his Instagram photo, and there was some Instagrams of him in Europe, taking pictures next to, Asian people who were tourists, right? And that was construed as racist. And then he was impeached. And so the best footage, and I haven't done an episode about this because I wanted to get him on the channel, but the best footage is that he is being escorted from the building by police. And the student protesters are screaming and yelling and screaming and yelling. And they just start doing all this dramatic stuff. I can't believe this. I can't believe this. And one kid, he's not a kid, he's a young adult, but one kid who I found his Facebook, and he wants to be a politician. He ends up throwing himself to the ground and crying, and somebody runs over to him with a teddy bear and a kid's book and takes him up in their arm, and they're both rocking together, and the guy's just I can't believe it. Here, let me...
literally a teddy bear?
Yeah, he actually has a teddy bear. Here, let me pull it up.
Let him go. Out of the way. He's out of the way. He's out of the way. You're so scared, it's all the worse for you. They're already gone. You're ready to arrest someone. They're gone. You're support it.
I'm tired of shedding tears. I'm mad. This is what happens. This is what
I'm
happens.
losing in this place, man. I will fucking lose it.
Wait till they're gone.
I don't want you to get hurt. Wait till they're gone. Please get out of our fucking garage that we fucking pay for.
We pay for them.
Please, fucking leave. We don't want to fucking see you.
Which is interesting. They do bring up, Haight and Lukianoff bring up the, what's it called? The consumerism, the consumer model of education. And the students do internalize that. And Evergreen protesters, they say that a lot, that we paid for this, we paid for this, we paid for this. And a lot of student groups that are protesting saying we paid for this, they have no idea that the school was actually paid for long before they got there and has huge endowments. It can't survive simply off of their tuition. So yeah, they're putting their 2 pennies in, but they didn't pay for the whole thing. They have no sense of history. There's no sense of respect of authority, no sense of respect for logic, and no idea of history other than that history is this long, bloody flood.
Yeah, to be honest, though, I'm more of a supporter of the idea of, we paid for this, it should be good. As a pro-capitalist, I have to say that I don't like the idea of people paying for things that are substandard products. But it's certainly true that students are usually very unaware of how much of their fees are being paid for by government subsidies or by, like you said, endowments.
To respond to that, the substandard product, I totally agree with you. But at the same time, it seems like what's happening is that a very small contingent is trying to recreate what the university is actually good for. And actually, there's this silent mass of people who want it to get better jobs, who want it to learn how to run businesses or how to be a psychologist or how to be a teacher, right? And then there's this small contingent that's very, very loud and has taken over the humanities. And then they have the students saying, this is not what we paid for. I just heard from an Evergreen professor who got, swept up in the protests. He was actually swept up in the sense that the protests came crashing down on him. He's teaching the business of social media marketing this year with a psychologist, and they had a wait list of 29 students, right? He was a professor that was called out during the protests. He's offering one of the most popular things on campus right now, and they have to deny all these students, right? Because the whole college is gearing towards, on the outside, it's gearing towards this equity and diversity stuff and pushing all this other stuff that students don't actually want to pay for. And so when we bring up the fact that Evergreen's enrollment is going to be between 270 and 350 incoming freshmen, they will constantly say that it's the bad press. They'll constantly say it's Fox News and Tucker Carlson, but they won't really look at, well, are we offering something that students want?
Yeah. Oh, sorry, I was just remembered what I was going to say, but about the getting a product that you want. It's kind of it's kind of like if you're going into a restaurant and you pay for a meal, of course. If there's something wrong with your meal, which is what you came there for, that there's flies in your food or it's cold or something, that is something you can complain about. You can say, I paid for this and it's bad. But on the other hand, if you go into the restaurant and there's some people talking on another table that you don't like, things about the restaurant that you could have known going in, or just you don't like the music that's playing, perhaps you can complain about that. But honestly, if you go to the restaurant and you say, I don't like the song, can you please put it on Kanye, or I don't know, something if you have an unreasonable demand. I quite like Kanye. I didn't mean to make that sound like an unreasonable, something that's not right for the restaurant. The restaurant doesn't have to meet your demands just because you paid for your meal. You're not, even though you're right to complain about when your meal is bad because you came in for the food, you're paying for the food. Yeah. The ambience is like, it's a bit of a gray area, right? Because the students come to university, they're paying for an education. Yeah. And they're paying for an exchange of ideas, but they also are paying for the experience of the ambience, and they're paying for the buildings, they're paying for the nice grounds, they're paying for the sports teams, the student activities together. So, to what extent should the students be able to decide on how those all of those little minutiae of student life, how that goes, and what the professors say to each other in emails, or what the university policy is on whatever. It's more of a gray area.
Yeah, I was thinking of a counter to that, and then I thought of the counter to the counter, but my counter was going to be, you walk into a restaurant and they're not serving burritos, or they are serving burritos, and you demand that they stop serving burritos or that they start serving burritos. But the university is more like a food court, where you go into the food court and you say, you know what, there's no taco joint here, or the taco joint is run by white people, and I want a taco joint run by, actual, taco making people, right? Or, or there's not, and I demand that this be or that other thing be. And it's just interesting that the language of demand frames the entire discussion as or else. And or else what? Like, or else
we're going to
what?
complain some more.
Yeah, we're going to keep on complaining. The thing is that, we're in societies so far that you can complain about anything. So I guess you're fine. You can complain about anything. Now, whether or not it's reasonable or not is a whole question. And then the question is further compounded by, isn't a college a place where reason should, win? Isn't that where reason should flourish? And if unreasonableness is the order of the day, then what is the use of the American or any sort of institution of higher learning?
Yeah, maybe this is going off topic, but I'm reading Intellectuals and Society by Thomas Sowell at the moment, talking about academics and what he calls the anointed, or the intelligentsia, which are composed of academics and that sort of smart people, intellectuals who have lots of ideas. He defines an intellectual as someone whose business starts and ends with ideas, and they often are out of touch with the rest of society. So just at the moment, that's just the mindset I'm in, is this Thomas Sowell mindset of being very critical of these intellectuals who do occasionally come up with some really good ideas, right? That you get some really good output sometimes, but they often have a certain amount of self-importance about their own knowledge of the world, because they believe, I'm a university professor, so my business is knowledge, and knowledge is my entire life. So they must know better about this, that, and the other than the people who are actually dealing with things on the mundane level of the rest of us, just going about our jobs, doing normal things.
I brought this up with a live stream between PSA Sitch and Adam Friended a couple weeks ago. They were talking about how the market might fix or pressure the colleges to work better. And if there's some way to establish or to flood like the way that capitalist market operates into the intellectual space, and what are the problems of that, and how do we test these ideas other than letting them just run and overtake the culture and then watch what happens? Are we going to inevitably find another red guard? And for that matter, the struggle sessions were performed by one generation. From what I understand, they're performed by one generation that was despised by their parents and their children, because they went through and they were very self-important and they did a whole bunch of very ugly things, and they thought that they did it all right. And then for the rest of history, they're frowned upon. So do you just let this idea go through this generation, or do you boost
I don't know
other
if we have a choice. Well, I am fairly optimistic about the lifetime of these ideas being quite short, mainly because so many of the very popular intellectuals and figures at the moment, especially with young people, are quite opposed to this. For example, Jordan Peterson being so popular at the moment, especially with young people at university age, is very encouraging. People who are willing to stand up for truth, even when it comes, even if it's uncomfortable. or if it's uncomfortable for other people.
That's,
And
yeah.
even people just like even people who aren't intellectuals, like just we were talking about PewDiePie earlier. He's not exactly political, but because of his sense of humor and his sort of manner, he does sort of give off this kind of bro vibe. Like, he's not PC police.
Yeah.
He's not a snowflake. He's just a regular guy, right? And he's hugely popular. And he even talked about Jordan Peterson in one of his episodes when he read 12 Rules for Life. And I just think figures like that who hugely popular among especially young people, that must be a good thing. That must be a good sign that even if there are these bad ideas prevailing, that there are at least a few people out there who are against them, and some of them actually might stand up for themselves. would be a good thing.
Towards the end of the book, they make a very clear assessment of social justice, and they say, we're Democrats, we're liberals. Here's all our cred, and we believe in social justice. And they break down what justice is. And throughout the book, they call out the good ideas and the bad ideas of progressivism. Like they talk about common identity, common identity politics, and common enemy identity.
Common
politics.
Humanity is the good one. Common enemy is the bad one. And I thought that was very interesting, actually, the way they harkened back to the 60s with Martin Luther King Jr. being their example of a very good civil rights leader, because he wasn't calling out white people, calling people the white devil, or saying that white people suck. Or he was saying we should all be together, brothers and sisters. We're all humans. We're all Americans. We should be able to live among each other as equals. So he was appealing to the existing sense of justice that people had, rather than trying to rile up this new idea. He was trying to sort of sneak in. I mean, that makes it sound bad, but it was a good way of making the people in charge realize that black people were, as important as white people and should be treated the same under the law. Basically, maybe that's summarizing it too simply, but the common humanity. He was appealing to common humanity rather than making black people the good people and white people the bad people.
I went to there was this ICE protest, and ICE is the immigration people for America.
Yep.
In Portland, there was this big protest, and what happened was that the protesters decided to camp out and block the ICE building from people coming and going. And I showed up there, and I went to one of their meetings. They have a meeting every day. And the very interesting thing that was happening at this meeting was that the progressive stack was alive and well. And by that I mean that they came out with a statement. The head of security is like, you know what? We don't need any more people on security. We have enough people on security. If you're white and you want to help us, take out our trash. And we need somebody to take care of the loo or the porta potty, right? And plus, we need more white liberals here. You need to call out your white friends and get them over here. And it was very interesting that whenever they talked about the black people, they always talked about how they're not being heard, or the trans people weren't being heard. And whenever they talked about white people, is that they're not serving enough. And they're not fulfilling their role. And so it was just very explicit that the way that this stuff shakes out, the way that this identity politics shakes out, or intersectionality shakes out, is that it forms it has to form a hierarchy. It wants to be against hierarchy and authority only to institute its own. So it's against reason only to institute its own reasoning into the argument. And it's against authority in order to assert its own authority.
I was just going to say about the book is sort of framed around the three great untruths, as the authors call them. And one of the three great untruths is the idea that there are good people and there are evil people, and all misery exists in the world because of the evil people, and it's the responsibility of the good people to fight the evil people. And I think that's the idea. That's one of the things going on in that situation you're describing, where you see a lot of what the left eating its own is what you get. It's kind of the meme going around at the moment. That the people within the left, they're constantly looking for enemies within their own ranks, for betrayers, or people, these moderates who are not being allies enough, and they they obviously the common enemy is the fascists, the right wing, the Nazis, whoever. But then they were also they constantly keep looking for people who are pretending apparently to side with them, or allies who are not true allies.
Mm-hmm.
They keep searching for more people to put in that enemy camp, and I don't know exactly why that is, except for the idea that I think I learned about when hearing about the Soviet Union, and the idea that when communism wasn't working, when socialism wasn't working, they had to have a reason. So it was like, oh, well, it's sabotage. Obviously, there's people in our ranks who are ruining this. We'll have to find them. So maybe the fact that there's all this infighting is just a result of it, of the whole movement not being very successful. But
that might come back to that first primary move of assuming that they're right, of knowing that they're already right, and that's like the utopian. The problem with the utopia is that you think that what you know now is so true that it will be true in the future with regards to this complex system of society. It's this projection of society. And because you build everything on that assumption, whenever you run into any sort of data that contradicts your assumption, you start throwing out these different coping mechanisms. And one of them is finding enemies, finding saboteurs. Another is saying that any sort of criticism is coming from the alt-right, is coming from the bad guy, But it's that assumption in the beginning that we are already right. And I see that at Evergreen, the way that the college administration frames it. It's like the world's changing and we need to adapt to the times. And so what they end up doing is adapting the times to them. And because that doesn't work, this whole cognitive dissonance it tumbles out of control. And so, and that's one of the things that resolves me into my optimism. It's like, this stuff has to burn itself out. But the problem is that it's being taught to every incoming freshman. Probably 80% of incoming freshmen in America right now are being taught this stuff.
You made a recent video reviewing the orientation document for, was it a recent video? Because sometimes I watch your old videos.
Yeah, it was like last week or so. Yeah.
I wasn't reading Coddling at the time, but were you at the time when you were reading that looking out for any of the great untruths, or looking out for these things that they were describing in the Coddling? Because that's something I've started doing, is looking specifically for either the great untruths or for these signs of the kind of mental gymnastics people do often, where they had a kind of list of things that people will do to justify their crazy beliefs. I can't remember what the list was called now, but was that something you noticed?
Well, the funny thing is that Evergreen gets its own chapter. Well, it gets its own section in here. And at the end of the section, they say, this is like the perfect example of the 3 great untruths, right? And so basically, in a way, like, it almost looks like they had the ideas already and they saw Evergreen and it was just a perfect match. And so anything that, when I go back and look through my videos, I'm like, okay, now I can reframe what I was trying to get at, or I've been trying to get at these, I've been pointing out the same things. I just didn't meld them all together into the way that Haidt and Lukianoff did. But it's there. It runs through the whole thing. Like these very primary mistakes or assumptions or untruths. Yeah,
and that was something I found really interesting about the book was, I'll just review them now if I can remember them. So there was the us versus them mentality, people and the good people dichotomy. That I just mentioned. There was the always trust your feelings, great untruth. Whatever your initial intuition was, you could just trust that. Don't question your feelings. Your feelings are right, and you should change the universe to fit how you feel. If you're offended, that means someone was being offensive. That means some harm was being done to you. If you feel attacked, it's because you're being attacked. That's one of the great untruths. And the other one was, what doesn't kill me makes me weaker. Yes. Yeah, that was the fragile mistake people make, thinking that if they, the example they use is with peanut allergies and other nut allergies. Parents fairly recently thought that if they protected their children from peanuts and all other kinds of nuts, it would protect them from possibly having an anaphylactic shock, having an allergic reaction. Just because the parents didn't know, if you don't know whether your kid has an allergy or not, maybe just avoid that food for the rest of their life, right? I knew a kid like that who was like, I can't eat that because I might be allergic to peanuts, which is kind of a funny thing to say, but that's what parents did. That was like, you just avoid nuts until you know that they're not allergic or something. And that actually caused more allergies because children were not being exposed to peanuts early on. Their bodies did not develop the capacity to deal with peanuts. And then they became allergic because of fear of allergies.
Yeah.
A large part of the book was talking about how that's been happening with a lot of different dangers that children are now being protected from, such as strangers, doing things on their own, doing things outside without supervision. It's making children weaker, not stronger.
And the same thing in the life of the mind, the same thing.
Yes, and that sort of danger is now being the concept creep, as they also described.
Yeah.
The concept of danger is now expanding to encompass psychological danger, the feelings of discomfort from being either insulted, offended, or just having your beliefs questioned, which is quite uncomfortable, as I'm sure you know. We've all experienced a bit of cognitive dissonance, and we know how uncomfortable it can be.
Yeah.
But being protected from that is certainly not a good thing, right? It's to keep yourself in an echo chamber intentionally, to be safe from cognitive dissonance is it's a really horrible thing to do to someone. And all of these great untruths, I think, will contribute to unhappiness in a person's life the more they practice them in the world.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that there's a way of mobilizing ourselves against these ideas that doesn't, and I think that they're so even-handed in the book that it might fly under the radar of the opposition of people that disagree with them, and might even start to make a difference, or it might just be discounted because it's not radical enough for anybody. And that's the problem with us fence sitters, not face sitters, but fence sitters, is that, that we're so passe and milquetoast that nobody's going to pay attention to us. But that's probably exactly what's needed to fight extremism.
Yeah. The thing is, you don't have to persuade the extremists, although that would be nice, of course. But the extremists only make up a minority, right? That, like what you were saying about Evergreen, was only being taken over by 10% of the student body.
Yeah.
It was only the enablers, which is the 40 or 50, 60, even 90% of the student body who are enabling those extremists. They're the ones who need to be persuaded that they can't just look away anymore, and that this is actually something that is a problem and perhaps should be considered as such and not just a nuisance. Of course we need to police ourselves is always good, right? But we are not the extremists, right? So how there's a question of how are we, you and I, people like us, how are we just supposed to lead by example, right? Or just refuse to conform to these ideas, and by that example prove that there are such things as good people in the world who are not conforming to the standard of a good person that these extremists are setting.
I think modeling behavior is the best way to do it, and in the modeling of behavior, showing how that behavior is actually more enjoyable and more rich. It's a more wealthy way of living to engage with your ideological opponents in a very respectful and fun way. Like, look, I'm going to talk with somebody I totally disagree with, and I've made fun of her ideology for 6 months now, but we're just going to sit down, not you, somebody else from last week, but we're going to sit down, we're going to laugh, and we're going to just listen to each other and talk. And we don't need to be riled up, and then we can turn around and still make fun and make the same points and be kind of, anti or pro whatever we are outside within measure.
I think it's also worth mentioning that I don't think these extremists remain extremists for their entire lives. It's a phenomenon of the university student. It's a quality of university students to be uniquely passionate and and riled up about this sorts of things. But I get the feeling that these people, the ones we're looking at in these videos, they're not going to be this way in 20 years. Maybe they will be. Maybe a few of them will be, but most of them, I believe, will just go on to act like normal members of society who were maybe a little bit annoying at parties, but definitely not causing people problems the way they are now.
So you're suggesting that protesters have about the same lifespan as porn stars?
Maybe they have like a brief reigniting of their career when they become MILF level. Yeah, I've just heard that about porn stars, is that they get popular around the late teens, early 20s, and then there's like a dip in their careers until they become like they can do MILF porn later.
I really do think that there's some sort of great cyclical thing going on where this decade rhymes with the 60s in a way, and at the end of this decade and the end of the 60s. And so we're probably looking at about a 4-year period of unrest. And if you go back and look at the 60s and 70s, the amount of violence was totally... It was really high. Like the amount of bombings in 1 year, I can't remember, it was in the early 70s. Like there was like 500 bombings in America, right? So when we go through this protest and we see all these young people acting in this way, like, yeah, they aren't actually getting violent, and actually all they're really doing is making fools of themselves and then forcing the devolution of academic standards. That's the outcome, is that they're making everything more and more pathetic and more incompetent, which is something that we really do need to get off our asses and ensure it doesn't happen. But they're not totally off the reservation. They're just kind of in the weird, corner of it. And I do worry about a lot of the students who are accepting this, and they will go through a phase where that will start to break down, or they'll go even further into it. And I think that along with antibodies to extremist progressivism, we also need to like have lifelines and like little paths out there for people to walk themselves back to, like a more moderate stance.
I was talking to someone recently who commented on one of my videos asking about they wanted some advice on how to talk to their professor who they disagreed with ideologically. And I was saying that you were just saying with like giving people lifelines and paths, like you have to give people space to save face when you're arguing with them, especially if they've got a big ego. They're not going to want to admit to being wrong. So you have to let them agree with you while still believing that they're right. Let them believe they're right while also thinking you're right. It's like a kind of compromise. And sometimes that might require being a bit dishonest, which I don't recommend. But I think that's a really good way of talking to people, having an honest argument while letting them keep the idea that they're right just a little bit, and because they'll agree with you then if they can still believe they're right at the end of it.
It's much easier for me to contradict myself as I was a year ago than as I was 20 minutes ago. Right. So just like inject time into that, like plant the ideas and let it grow. Understand that people don't change overnight. Yeah. Is there something funny we should put at the end of this, or should we just like, I'll cut it and I'll throw something in at the end?
What I was going to say that was somewhat funny, I don't know if it's funny, but to me, it's like when you were saying that we're experiencing a revival of the 60s or 70s, I got kind of excited because I was looking forward to the new 80s, like the new like Reagan Thatcherism, like right wing, like decade.
It's going to totally happen.
It's going to be happening. Like my kids are going to be born in the new 80s. They're going to be the new 80s kids.
Oh, jeez.
That would be brilliant. We'll have good films again.
Oh, really? Is this your decade?
The 80s, you mean?
The 80s are your, like, that's your high peak of British culture?
I love 80s movies, yeah. Huh. All American movies. Not like British movies are, hit and miss.
What are you talking about? Like The Breakfast Club and Ferris Bueller's Day Off and that stuff? Or?
Yeah. One of my all-time favorite films is Raiders of the Lost Ark. And that starts off the 80s. We got, Predator, the golden age of Arnold Schwarzenegger.